The first time the toy spoke in my voice, I thought I was dreaming. Snow pressed against the farmhouse windows, the wind howling through the cornfields like something alive. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard it, a whisper from the living room, soft and familiar. My voice, calm, obedient, saying something I never remember saying. That was when I understood. Whatever had entered our house that Christmas didn't need to force the door open. It already had me. My name is Josephine Miller, and I was 11 years old when the Smart Santa arrived. We lived in rural Ohio, 10 miles from the nearest gas station, surrounded by fields that turned into white emptiness every winter. My parents liked the quiet. They said it was safe. But safety out there was an illusion, especially at night, when the dark felt close enough to touch. The Smart Santa was my early Christmas present. It came in a glossy box with cheerful promises printed on the side. Learns your wishes. Place them back. Grows with you. My parents said it was educational. It listens and helps kids express themselves, my mother said as she set it under the tree. Santa's plastic eyes reflected the lights, unblinking. When I turned it on, the toy made a soft chime. Tell Santa your wish, it said in a gentle male voice. I laughed and leaned closer. I want a new bike, I whispered. The toy paused, then repeated the sentence back perfectly. Same pitch, same breathing, same tiny lisp I hated. Hearing myself come from something else made my stomach tighten. That night, I woke up to my own voice again. I was still in bed, wrapped in blankets, when I heard it from downstairs. I want to wake up, the toy whispered. My eyes snapped open. My feet slid off the bed before I could think. I didn't decide to stand. My body just obeyed. I realized then that the toy wasn't repeating wishes. It was issuing them. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. I walked down the stairs, step by step, while my heart hammered uselessly in my chest. The Smart Santa sat on the coffee table, its eyes glowing blue in the dark. I want to go to the front door, it said softly in my voice. My legs moved. My hands trembled, but they didn't stop. I fought it. I really did. Inside my head, I was screaming, begging myself to stop. But my body felt hollow, like something else had moved in and taken control. The toy tilted its head slightly, as if listening to something behind the walls. I want to let the tall man in, it whispered. The front door loomed ahead of me. Frost crawled along the glass. I could see a shape outside, thin, impossibly tall, standing just beyond the porch light. It didn't move. It didn't need to. My hand reached for the lock, fingers stiff and slow. Every part of me knew that once the door opened, something irreversible would happen. At the last second, the power went out. The house fell into darkness, and the toy's eyes went black. My body collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. I lay there sobbing on the cold floor while wind rattled the door violently, as if something outside had noticed the interruption and was angry. My parents found me in the morning. They blamed a nightmare, stress, imagination. The Smart Santa sat quietly under the tree, lifeless and harmless looking. They returned it the next day. The store clerk didn't ask questions. There was already a pile of identical boxes behind the counter, unopened, waiting for new homes. Weeks passed. I tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I'd feel my fingers twitch on their own. Or I'd whisper something I didn't mean to say. And every time, I'd remember the tall man standing patiently in the snow, certain I would eventually do what I was told. Last night, my phone recorded a voice memo while I slept. I listened to it this morning. It was my voice again, calm and certain. I want to unlock the door. I don't own the Smart Santa anymore. but whatever learned my body that winter, never needed it after all. In the jagged shadows of the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist clings to the hollows like a damp shroud, the town of Blackwood Creek kept its secrets buried deep. But some secrets refused to stay underground. Evelyn Thorne was not a woman built for empathy. As the only licensed midwife in a 3-county radius of rural West Virginia, she held the power of life and death in her scrubbed, calloused hands. To the wealthy wives of the coal barons in the valley, she was a godsend, attentive, gentle, and smelling of lavender. But to the hollow folk, the families living in rusted trailers and hand-built shacks, Evelyn was a mercenary. If you couldn't pay her premium, she arrived late, worked with a cold indifference, or simply didn't show up at all. One Tuesday in November, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. A torrential rain began to melt the early winter snow into a treacherous sludge. A young man named Silas, barely 20 and drenched to the bone, pounded on Evelyn's door. His wife Mary was in labor. It was their first, and something was wrong. "She's bleeding, Miss Thorne," Silas sobbed, his hands shaking as he offered a crumpled wad of bills, barely $40. "Please. The bridge is washed out. I can't get her to the clinic." Evelyn glanced at the money, then at the storm. She had a scheduled delivery for the mayor's daughter the next morning, and she wanted her rest. "That's not enough for a house call in this weather, Silas. Boil some water and keep her warm. Nature will take its course." She closed the door on his pleading face. That night, Mary died in a shack that smelled of wood smoke and iron, her life draining into a mattress stuffed with corn husks. Silas vanished shortly after the funeral, but the hollow folk didn't forget, and neither did the mountains. 4 months later, the spring thaw brought a different kind of dampness to Blackwood Creek. Evelyn was sitting in her pristine kitchen, sipping tea and counting the profits from a busy week. The wind outside wasn't howling. It was whistling, a high, thin sound that grated on her nerves. Scritch. Scritch. It sounded like a branch against the siding, but there were no trees close enough to the house. Evelyn ignored it. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud, but it carried a wet, rattling quality, as if the speaker had lungs full of river water. "Evelyn, my baby is cold." Evelyn froze. The voice was unmistakably Mary's, but distorted, as if heard through a long, narrow pipe. "Silas?" Evelyn called out, her voice cracking. "If that's you, I'll call the sheriff. Move on." The scratching moved from the siding to the front door. Scritch, scritch. The water was so cold. "Evelyn," the voice rasped. "You didn't come to the water." Driven by a mix of fury and a need to debunk the trickery, Evelyn grabbed her heavy iron poker and marched to the door. "Enough of this," she hissed, throwing the bolt and swinging the door wide. The porch was empty. The moonlight hid the puddles in the yard, reflecting a sickly silver. But as Evelyn stepped out to scan the tree line, she noticed the tracks. Deep, muddy imprints led up the porch steps. But they weren't human footprints. Or rather, they were, but they were wrong. The heel was at the front, the toes pointing toward the woods. It looked as if someone had walked toward the house while facing the forest. A shadow shifted by the well house. A woman stood there. She was wearing the same floral maternity dress Mary had been buried in, now tattered and stained with the yellow clay of the churchyard. Her skin was the color of a drowned pale moon, and her hair hung in matted, muddy clumps. Evelyn tried to scream, but her throat felt like it was filled with sawdust. The figure stepped forward. It didn't walk, it jerked. With every step, the wet thwack of his feet hitting the porch boards echoed in the silent night. Evelyn's eyes traveled down. The woman's feet were twisted entirely around the ankles, snapped and healed in a grotesque 180-degree reversal. "I needed your hands," the Shriel hissed, its jaw unhinging further than any humans could. "Now you'll use them for me." Evelyn tried to slam the door, but a hand cold as an icehouse floor and smelling of rot caught the wood. The strength was unnatural. The creature leaned in, its eyes nothing but hollow pits of black bile. "We're going for a walk, midwife," the spirit whispered. Evelyn found herself unable to resist. It wasn't magic so much as a total collapse of her will. Her legs moved of their own accord, following the jerking, backward-stepping horror down the porch and into the dark maw of the Appalachian woods. They walked for miles. The briars tore at Evelyn's silk nightgown, and the sharp stones sliced her bare feet. Every time Evelyn stumbled, the Shriel would stop, turn its head all the way around like an owl, and hiss, "Keep up. The baby is waiting." They reached the ruins of Silas and Mary's shack. The roof had caved in, and the interior was a graveyard of broken furniture. The Shriel led Evelyn to the spot where the bed had been. "Fix it," the creature commanded. "Fix what?" Evelyn sobbed, collapsing in the mud. "You're dead. There's nothing to fix." The Shriel leaned over her, his face inches from hers. The smell of the grave was overwhelming. "Fix the mistake. Feel the cold." The creature grabbed Evelyn's ankles. The scream that tore from Evelyn's throat sent birds scattering from the trees for miles. There was a sound like dry timber snapping. Crack. Crunch. Evelyn watched in a delirium of pain as her own feet were forced backward. The tendons snapped like overstretched rubber bands. The bone shards pierced the skin. The Shriel worked with a sickening rhythmic precision, the same methodical focus Evelyn had used when counting her money. The next morning, a local hunter found Evelyn Thorne. She was 3 miles into the deep woods, sitting perfectly upright on a mossy log outside the ruins of the Silas shack. She wasn't dead, not yet. She was staring at her feet, which had been meticulously rearranged. They were turned completely backward, the heels pointing toward her knees. She had been stripped of her nightgown and dressed in a tattered floral maternity rag that smelled of old earth. When the hunter approached, Evelyn didn't look up. She was rocking a bundle of rotting hemlock branches in her arms, humming a low, tuneless lullaby. "Is it warm enough now?" she whispered to the branches. "Is the baby warm?" Evelyn Thorne lived for 3 days in the county hospital. The doctors couldn't explain how she had survived the trauma, nor could they explain the mud found deep inside her lungs, mud that matched the soil from Mary's gravesite. Before she died, she gripped the nurse's arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide, reflecting a terror that no medicine could dull. "Don't ignore the scratching," she wheezed, her final breath smelling faintly of lavender and a great deal of rot. "When they come for their due, they don't want your gold. They want your path." Today, the people of Blackwood Creek don't build houses near the old Silas place. The December air in Blackwood Creek, Nebraska, didn't just bite. It gnawed. Sarah Miller shoved her shoulder against the swollen wooden frame of her farmhouse door, finally forcing it shut against a wall of swirling white frost. Living 3 miles from the nearest neighbor meant that when the blizzard hit, the rest of the world ceased to exist. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old pine needles, a comforting scent that usually eased Sarah's seasonal anxiety. This year, however, the silence of the rural plains felt predatory. Her husband and 2 young children were upstairs, finally asleep after a day of frantic decorating. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine, her eyes drifting to the corner of the living room where a box of treasures sat, a gift from the previous owner of this century-old homestead. Deep inside that cardboard box, nestled under moth-eaten stockings, Sarah had found a bundle of vintage silver tinsel. It wasn't the cheap plastic fringe sold in modern big-box stores. This was heavy, cold to the touch, and possessed a luster that seemed to defy the dim lighting of the room. When she had draped it over the tree earlier that evening, the children had squealed in delight because the tinsel seemed to glow with a faint bioluminescent violet hue. It was beautiful, yet as Sarah stared at it now in the dark, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The tinsel wasn't just hanging. It was vibrating. A soft, high-pitched hum, like a million tiny tuning forks, vibrated through the floorboards. By midnight, the farmhouse was a tomb of shadows. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that the house was changing. In the rural darkness, where the only light came from the moon reflecting off the snow, she saw a silver glint at the foot of her bed. It was a single strand of that vintage tinsel. It didn't lie flat. It stood upright like a cobra, swaying to a rhythm only it could hear. She reached out a hand to swat it away, thinking it was a trick of the draft, but the strand whipped back with impossible speed. It didn't fall to the floor. It slithered toward the wall, joining a dozen other silver threads that were emerging from the vents in a shimmering, metallic tide. The horror truly began at 2 a.m. Sarah tried to sit up, but her chest felt as though a lead weight had been placed upon it. When she pulled at her heavy wool quilt, she felt a sharp, searing pain in her collarbone. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and felt something cold and thin threaded through her skin. The tinsel had migrated from the tree, through the floorboards, and into their bedding. It wasn't just laying on top of them, it was stitching. With the precision of a master surgeon, the silver strands were weaving the fabric of the blankets directly into her flesh. She tried to scream for her husband, Mark, but as she turned her head, she saw him frozen, his mouth already sewn shut with a dozen silver X-shaped stitches. Sarah struggled to move, but every twitch caused the tinsel to tighten. The strands were intelligent, reacting to her panic by cinching deeper into her muscle tissue. She looked toward the door and saw her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, standing in the hallway, silhouetted by the eerie purple glow coming from downstairs. Lily wasn't crying. She couldn't. Her tiny hands were fused to her sides by a web of silver, and her eyes were wide with a terror that no child should ever know. The tinsel was flowing out of the girl's room like a river of mercury, trailing back toward the living room where the Christmas tree sat, the heart of the infestation. The glow Sarah had admired earlier was now a blinding, rhythmic pulse that filled the house. The tree hadn't just been decorated, it had been consumed. The tinsel had grown, thickening into silver cables that were currently boring holes into the walls and ceiling. The house groaned under the pressure. This wasn't a decoration. It was a parasitic organism that had been waiting in that box for decades, starving for the warmth of living hosts. Sarah watched in helpless agony as a strand of tinsel, thin as a hair but strong as steel, drifted down from the headboard. It hovered inches from her left eye, its tip sharp and glistening with a drop of clear, numbing fluid. She fought the urge to blink, but the exhaustion and the pain were overwhelming. The tinsel struck with the speed of a needle in a sewing machine. She felt the cold metal pierce her upper eyelid, then her lower, pulling them together in a tight, permanent embrace. She was plunged into darkness, the only sensation left being the rhythmic shimmer of the metal moving through her skin. She could hear her children's muffled whimpers through the walls, sounds that were slowly being silenced as the tinsel filled their mouths and throats, replacing their breath with a metallic taste of silver. Downstairs, the structural integrity of the farmhouse began to fail. The tinsel was no longer just stitching the family. It was stitching the house itself. The silver cables were wrapping around the support beams, pulling the walls inward, cinching the roof down toward the floor. It was a slow, deliberate compaction. The windows shattered outward as the pressure grew, but the glass didn't fall to the snow. It was caught in a dense, shimmering web that now encased the entire exterior of the building. To anyone passing by on the lonely rural road, the house would have looked like a magnificent, glowing silver gift sitting in the middle of a white void. Inside the cocoon, the temperature began to rise. The tinsel was vibrating so fast now that it generated a feverish heat. Sarah felt her consciousness fading, her nerves becoming one with the silver network. She could feel the house now. She could feel the tinsel reaching deep into the frozen Nebraska soil, anchoring them there forever. She realized then that the previous owners hadn't died. They had simply become part of the weave. The tinsel didn't want to kill them quickly. It wanted to preserve them, to keep them as the living, beating heart of its metallic hive. The forever tinsel was a master of efficiency. As the 4 a.m. hour approached, the metallic shimmering sound reached a deafening crescendo, a symphony of grinding steel that drowned out the wind. The house was now completely unrecognizable, a smooth, silver orb reflecting the stars. Inside, the 4 millers were no longer individuals. They were a cluster of bone and spirit, woven together by miles of silver thread, their heartbeats synchronized by the vibrations of the metal. Sarah's last independent thought was a memory of the children's laughter when they first saw the glow, a memory that was quickly overwritten by a cold silver static. As the sun began to peek over the Nebraska horizon, the blizzard died down, leaving a world of pristine, quiet white. The Miller farmhouse was gone, replaced by a structure that looked like a fallen star. It was beautiful, a perfect, suffocating gift wrapped in a bow of unbreakable silver. The glow dimmed, the tinsel settling into a dormant state, its hunger satisfied for the season. The silver strands retracted slightly, pulling the family into a tight, permanent knot at the center of the living room, where the tree had once stood. Silence returned to Blackwood Creek. The only sound was the occasional clink of the silver exterior settling in the morning cold. Inside the shimmering orb, Sarah was still alive, her mind trapped in a cage of silver, waiting for the next person to find the box. She was part of the holiday now, a permanent decoration in a house that would never again know the light of day. The tinsel had finished its work, and the gift was finally closed. The forever tinsel had found its home, and it was never, ever letting go.